Hey, everybody. This episode of Our Kids Play Hockey is brought to you by our title sponsor, NHL Sense Arena. Look, we all want our kids to succeed in hockey, but let's face it, finding training that's both effective and enjoyable can be a real challenge, and not to mention expensive and a total drain on time, especially if you have to drive to the rink, pay a private instructor. There's so many reasons that money gets spent on this game. But that's where NHL Sense Arena steps in. It's a virtual reality training game that brings the rink into your home that takes off-ice training to a new reality. It's designed to improve hockey sense and IQ, something that's lacking majorly in the game today for both players and goalies. And you get unlimited access to over 100 drills and training plans from top coaches and players that can be played anytime, anywhere, with drills approved by USA Hockey player and goalie development directors. Look, improving mental hockey skills at home has really never been more fun, and any hockey player that uses this is going to have a blast. All right. I've used this before on my own, and it feels like you're so immersed in an arena, you sometimes forget you have a headset on. And again, it's not being on the ice, but it allows you to work on some of these skill sets like scanning, as I said before, hockey IQ, looking around the rink, making the right plays, that getting those repetitions in now as a hockey player are super important for your development. So NHL Sense Arena is giving all the listeners an exclusive offer for $50 off an annual plan when you use our code Hockey Never Stops at checkout. Again, that's Hockey Never Stops. All you got to do is go to hockey.sensearena.com. Again, that's hockey.sensearena.com. Use the code Hockey Never Stops, and you'll save $50 on your annual plan of NHL Sense Arena. Make sure to check that out and enjoy this episode of Our Kids Play Hockey. Well, we got a special episode today, especially special for me, if you'll humor me for a moment. Today we have on my favorite play-by-play announcer, Jim Jackson. As growing up in the Philadelphia area, this is who I heard every game. So it's a special for me, but we dive into not the Philadelphia Flyers, I promise you. We dive into his experience, obviously, as a broadcaster, how you can experience professionally the game outside of playing. So for your young kids, I always say it's so important that we talk to them about there's more ways to be involved in the game than just playing, although play as long as you can. And we also dive a little bit into the NHL and the athletes and the people that he's involved with, both on the ice, the front office. We talked about on the show his longtime color commentator, Keith Jones, who's now the president of the Flyers. He was commentating beside him for 17 years, how that relationship has got him to that front office position. So a lot of great gems in this one with Jim Jackson, so make sure you check it out. Also, the season is fast approaching. If you're looking for a book for your kid this year, head over to whenhockeystops.com and check out our children's book that Christy Casciano Burns and I wrote, When Hockey Stops, which deals with the adversity in sport. Again, you can find it whenhockeystops.com or Amazon, wherever you like, and let us know what you think about it. And finally, if you're enjoying these episodes, the season is upon us. Make sure you're sharing these episodes with your new friends in Team Snap or Bench App or wherever it is. We really love the support, especially on our Facebook community, Our Kids Play Hockey. Wherever you decide to experience it, we appreciate it. We appreciate the reviews, and we appreciate your love for us and what we do every day. So without further ado, let's dive into this episode with Jim Jackson on Our Kids Play Hockey. Hello, hockey friends and families around the world, and welcome to another edition of Our Kids Play Hockey. I'm Lee Elias with Mike Benelli, and our guest today is entering his 30th year as an NHL play-by-play announcer and broadcaster with the Philadelphia Flyers. He's a graduate of the prestigious Syracuse University Broadcast Journalism Department, where I'm sure he has made them proud, having received multiple Emmys and accolades for his time on the mic, including an induction into the Greater Utica Sports Hall of Fame. Like most of our guests beyond the bio, he is most proud of being a father to his two children, Deanna and Johnny, and husband to his wife, Bernadette. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Jim Jackson to the show today. Jim, welcome to Our Kids Play Hockey.
Great to be here, guys.
It's great to have you. So, Jim, I'm going to start off with a little bit of a story for you. I don't know if you realize this, but this is actually not the first time we've met. The first time I met you in person was back in the year 2002. I was 18 years old. I had just graduated high school, and I was signing up for this camp, this new experimental camp. It was called the Sports Broadcasting Camp. And I remember talking to the guy running the camp. His name is Jeremy Treatman. He still does it to this day. And he says, well, listen, you're 18 years old. This is kind of a camp for younger kids. And he's like, are you sure you want to do this? I remember being on the phone. Are you sure you want to do this? And I was going to college at the time for broadcasting. And I saw on the list that Jim Jackson was going to be at this camp. And as you can imagine, as an 18-year-old, as a hockey player, as a broadcaster, someone who had watched you my whole life. I'm like, I need to go to this camp. And I met you at the camp, and it was a wonderful time. You were so nice to me. It was the perfect final touching point before leaving for college. And again, you and I have seen a lot of broadcasters come out of this camp, but I had to start with that story because it was a really great moment for me. And as you can see, we are meeting again in a broadcasting way, which I think is amazing.
I told you it would happen if you stuck to it. It's interesting because I was their very first speaker, I believe. Jeremy always touts that. I'm speaking at their camp in a couple of days. So I still do it at least once, sometimes twice a year. Obviously it's grown. It's all over the country now. It's right. A huge thing. And as you say, there are some very, Chris Lewis was at that very camp that you were at. He's now on CBS television.
Right.
Ryan Smith's in the AHL. There's all kinds of kids who were 12, 13, 14 when I met them, these camps, who are now, in their 30s, and they're making it into the business. So I'll be in my rocking chair and who knows how many years just watching all these people, and that's going to be fun. But it's a great camp, and I've gotten into broadcast coaching myself since I left the Phillies. So I've had more time on my hands in the summer, especially. So I do broadcast coaching through Zoom and more directly one-on-one, but I still talk at the sports broadcasting play-by-play camp too, and it's always fun. So I was glad to meet you back then. I can't say I remember it, but
it's okay. Don't worry about
it. The statute of limitations on my memory is getting shorter. It's probably down to about 5 months now. So I met you 5 months, more than 5 months ago. I don't remember you anymore. So.
I think what's important, Jim, is I rememred it. I remember it had an impact on me. And again, you've had an impact on a lot of people. And I will say real quick, because every time I tell people, I went to the sports broadcasting camp, who goes for that? And as you said, this is a nationally run camp now.
Yeah.
It is very popular. I love it.
And now, back. They're in all big cities. The biggest names, Mike Tirico speaks at it.
Charles Barkley.
Charles Barkley this year here locally. So, it's huge. And that now the way the world works now, it's all specialized. So now I would be surprised now if anybody would ask you that. But back then, it was, I remember when they asked me, I'm like, wow, I wish I had this when I was a kid, because that's how old I am. I wasn't even a kid when that started. It is such a great, they give them hands-on experience. They go over tapes with them. They have great people talk to them. What an experience that has to be. I wish I had that. I grew up in a small town, upstate New York, and, I had nothing. I basically watched 3 stations of television back then. ESPN just came into being as I was getting to late high school, and there wasn't a whole lot to see, let alone experience trying to get into broadcasting. So that's a blessing. And now you fast forward to today, and you've got this, right? You've got social media and Zoom and all these things, all the great things they have now going for them. So that's good. A lot of things have maybe gone the other direction in life, but certainly technology has helped in terms of coaching and focusing on something you specifically want to do with your life, whether it's broadcasting or some other vocation or some other interest, some other passion. You now have ways in which you can learn about it, maybe even experience it. So that's a positive of all this technology.
Well,
yeah. No, I was just going to say, the real cool thing is, like, every kid grows up being kind of their own broadcaster, right? Like, yes. It's the Stanley Cup finals, or, it's the final goal of the game. I hear my kids, they're broadcasting themselves, in the third person playing, EA Sports or something. So I think it's so cool that, the broadcasting, number one, there's actually, a more formal schooling and education for that, but that there's so many different ways. We talk about it all the time about how people can get into the game in any way. Right. And I think that's, so if you're a young kid that loves, just loves the game and knows a lot about it, is really educated about players and statistics and the history of the game, it's really a fun, I would think it'd just be a fun thing to explore if you have a kid that loves a sport, in our case, hockey, and maybe it's not, maybe not destined to be an NHL hockey player. Right. But it's really, really, really cool opportunity. So, Lee, that's great. What a great story. That
I'm not sure you even knew that. And Jim, I'll tell you,
we all start wanting to play the sport.
Right.
I was. Right. A lot of times I'm very stubborn, and it takes a while for something be pounded in my head that I wasn't going to make it to the NHL was not one of them. I realized at a very early age that I wasn't going to make it to the NFL, Major League Baseball, the NBA or the NHL. So I pretty early on said, got to find another way. And it was my father who said, why don't you're always talking when the games are on. You're calling the games off the television when we're watching them anyhow. Why don't you get into broadcasting? So it was his idea, and here I am.
Awesome.
Jim, I got a similar talk from my own father. And I'll tell you two things. One, you did make the NHL and the MLB, and you did it with a lot of grace and a lot of honor. And two, for those of you not watching this episode, you look exactly as I remember you 20 years ago. So I just
That's not true.
You might not think that.
How old are you now? I guess
I'm about to be
38.
40. I'm going to be the oldest camper of all time. About to be 40.
So. You're about 40 and you need glasses.
Yeah.
If you think I look the same. But and I can't tell you whether you do or not. I doubt you had that beard.
I have no hair now, and I did not have this beard back then. So I look a little different. I had very long hair at that time. That's probably why you don't recognize me.
Yeah, long hair. All right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I've met just through that camp alone hundreds of kids. So
right. And
I've had a couple come up who brought me the picture of me with them when they were a kid, and now they want a picture as an adult. It's kind of weird. Then they send both pictures to me in the email, and it's like, wow, it is. But it's a great experience. And I got to tell you, I mean, when I was let go by the Phillies during the pandemic for the reasons that a lot of people got let go of during the pandemic, it was crushing and it was terrible, and it's still not a great financial thing for me, but I am so happy it happened in almost every other way but financial, because I don't miss the job. I miss the people. I miss the ballpark. I do not miss the job at all. But more importantly, I now have summers where I can go on a legitimate vacation. I can use my pool. I can golf. I can do things like that. But I also been able to dive into the coaching, voiceover too, but the coaching in particular. It's so rewarding. In just 3 years now, I've had 60 to 65 people that I've worked with, and it's just, I almost feel like I now have like 65 kids, but and they're not all kids. I've had a 58-year-old who's a podcaster who wanted to do it too, but a lot of them are obviously younger, and I just it's very rewarding, and it's great to get to know them, to see their passion, and to tell them that so much of life is finding a passion that you can make your life, make your living, monetize it in some way. Because I just think a big problem in this country, big problem in this world really right now, are people are at best bored, at worst miserable in their jobs. And, if you find a passion and are able to make that your job, I'm living proof. It's just a great way to go, because you don't work a day of your life that way.
One of the things I was going to ask you this later, but since we brought it up, let's do it now. Especially for our younger listeners, is that there are so many ways to be involved in hockey aside from actually playing, which you alluded to earlier. And I think when you're able to see the game from that kind of branched out area, it can create, like you said, a passionate pathway for you to pursue the game. I know certainly I've been blessed to be involved in the game my whole life. Mike is in a similar boat. But I'd love for you to talk to the parents and their children that are listening, that there are so many ways to be involved in hockey beyond playing. It's important that you cultivate that passion in other ways too.
Yeah, and I tell all my broadcast students this too. You got to keep your horizon very broad, because there's only so many broadcasting jobs. So I know their passion, their dream might be that, and always shoot for your dream. I never discourage that. But a lot of people I've had going for this dream end up taking a little side road over here. Maybe they'll get back to that, but sometimes they go over here and they like it. A good case in point, there was a kid who was at Westchester who was a huge hockey guy. He was a huge sports guy, pretty good broadcaster. He asked me to go over and speak to his class. So I did. And after the class came up to me and said, I'd love to have you listen to some of my tapes. I've done some games. Can you critique them for me? This is before I had my own coaching, of course. And I said, sure. And I listened. He was pretty good. I mean, I think this was a guy who had a real shot. But, he graduates about a year later, and there's nothing out there for him. So there was an internship with the Flyers in PR. And I said, hey, why don't you go for it? It's, half season thing. It's no pay, but it'll get your, you're done with school. Why don't you do it? He did it. He got done with that, and he was very good. He was around the broadcasters, which was good for him. And then that ended, and he said, what do I do now? And I go, no bites, no nibbles at all in the broadcast? He goes, no. And I said, well, the Phillies have an actual position in PR. I was still working with the Phillies then. And he said, well, can I go for that? I said, absolutely. Well, he went for that, and he ended up with the Phillies. He climbed up to like their third in command, second in command in their PR department. He just this summer left for another job in PR at Villanova. But, so there he is. He ended up going over here, and no one was more passionate about broadcasting than this kid, but he ended up going over here to PR. And I did ask him, it was actually right after I left the Phillies. I said, you still have any payings for broadcasting? He goes, yeah, once in a while, but I just love PR now, and he's made a great living at it. So that happens. And as far as hockey in particular, I'm going through this right now with my son because he's a senior in college, and the reckoning is coming. College is going to end, and he's not going to be a player anymore. I mean, he has a slight chance to maybe play at one of the lower professional leagues if he wants to keep playing, but ultimately he wants to be in the sport in some other way, and he's just not sure yet. He's an honors student in business with a minor in sports management, has also got analytics in his on his repertoire. So there's analytics, there's coaching, there's scouting. There are so many ways. Broadcasting is not his interest, so that one's out for him. And PR, I don't think is probably where he wants to go. But though I just named 5 possible ways you can get involved with a team some way. He has a great eye for talent, so he could be a great scout. He works really well with young kids, so he could go into low-level coaching if he wanted to. And he's very good at math and can certainly handle analytics. And I really think there's a major need in hockey for analytics people who've played the game to some level, whether it's high school, college, pro, NHL. Obviously, the higher the better, I suppose. But I really think analytics is here to stay. There's no doubt about it. But I think we need people in the positions of the people who go talk to the coaches who are a little bit more game knowledgeable. We have a lot of math majors in analytics that have never played the game, don't even know the game, really. They know the numbers and know the numbers as well as anybody, but you have to have at least some people, I think, in your analytics department, eventually, if you don't already, that have played the game and have knowledge of it so you can equate, because there's still a gap between many coaches and the analytics department, because the coaches don't trust just the numbers. They want somebody who has some idea of the game bringing those numbers to them. So maybe you have someone in between, go between the actual analytics person and the coach. But I still think there's a market, and will be a growing market for that. So maybe that's the way it goes. So you're right. There's so many ways you can get involved in this great game. And I'm going through it with him because he could probably go in any of the 3 I mentioned and be successful. Obviously, he'll make more money in analytics right off the bat. But his passion, to me, if I asked him, I think, take money out of it. What do you like best? It's actually scouting. He can go to a game. My son, he's now 22, 23, just turned 23. And he can go to a game and see stuff that Keith Jones used to tell me about when we're sitting, and watching his skate. Just little things about how a guy is skating or how he handles the puck, even in a practice. And Jonesy's ridiculously insightful that way. I mean, he comes off as this guy who's just a funny guy. Well, obviously he's president of the Flyers now, so we all know that secret's up. But I could sit with him at a morning skate, and he would see stuff that I'm like, really? Wow. And it would bear out in the game almost every time. My son's kind of like that. So he could be a scout for sure. He has a good eye for talent. Loves coaching kids. Like I said, he could do any of these 3. I don't know which path he's going to take.
Well, it's so awesome that there's multiple paths. I'm just going to list some of these ones you said a minute ago. And these are just kind of directions in the game: broadcast, analytics, scouting, coaching, business is one, PR. Some of these are the NHL. There's also other ways to be involved outside of the NHL.
Absolutely.
I'm going to format this into a question now. You're a professional. You're one of the best, in my opinion. And you are around professionals all the time, whether it's front office people, athletes, you travel with the team. So we talk a lot on this show about how it's somewhat dangerous for young people to only identify as, I am a hockey player. That's who I am. That's what I am. I'm curious what you've seen over the years of what the quality of character is of these professionals and what you see amongst them that makes them professionals and makes them succeed. Because I think that those tools go around the board to broadcasting, analytics, scouting, coaching, business, PR. If you want to be a pro at anything, you have to share some of these, and it's not just being able to do a Michigan or have a great skating ability. Can you touch on that for a few minutes?
Yeah, and I mean, again, I hesitate sometimes to get into talks like this because I don't want to generalize. I mean, not all hockey players are what I'm about to say. There are some bad eggs. There are some very individual hockey players, but I've covered all four major sports, two of them at a major league level and the other two at collegiate levels and minor league levels. Did 1 year of Division I basketball. I've been around all the four major sports and not soccer as much, so I can't really talk to that, but the other four, and it's not even close that hockey players are kind of the most team oriented of that group. And I think that if you come from the background of being a team player, it really helps you in business. It helps you in any of the areas we just talked about. Even though a scout lives a very lonely life in many instances because he's on the road all the time, he still has to be a team player too, because while he's going to push his players to the team, he's got to know what's best for the team ultimately, or he's going to lose his job. He just won't be a very good scout. So it's always about the team. And I noticed that about hockey players more than the other sports. I'm not saying there aren't those kind of players in other sports too. There absolutely are. And football is pretty close to hockey in that regard, although it's gotten so individual in the last 10 to 15 years just because of the way it's covered. But, if you talk to linemen in football in particular, they have a hockey mentality. The linemen know that if the guy next to him is not doing his job, he's probably not going to do very good, because you know how that works with when you're rushing the quarterback or when you're trying to stop a run play. If the guy next to you goes off course, you're probably screwed. You're going to end up getting double teamed or whatever. So teamwork among the linemen in football is but in hockey, it's everybody minus the goaltender, but the goaltender relies on everybody else. And now they handle the puck so much, they also have to be involved a little bit, but certainly everybody else has to be completely in sync. And if you get a guy who is, or a gal who is not with the program, it really hurt the program and really stick out. And I just think that it's so quick now. The game's so fast. You have to be all on the same page. We see it all the time where teams with less talent beat teams with better talent. I would not say the Vegas Golden Knights last year, as constructed, were the most talented team, but they won the Stanley Cup. And a lot of it was because they just got into a system, had a great coaching job. And I mean, they were the best team in the long run. Other sports, basketball for sure, talent is king. It's an individual sport. It's all about the stars. Baseball is an individual sport by nature. It's pitcher versus hitter. There is teamwork, certainly defensively. There's teamwork between pitcher and catcher, but there's not that all-inclusive teamwork that you need in hockey. Football is the closest because there's a lot of players who have to be in sync to make it work. But now with receivers getting a little bit out there on their own island, defensive backs, the same thing, quarterbacks, it's kind of always been that way. You're seeing that become very individualized too. But without those linemen, none of these other stars get what they need. So there's still that team element of football too, but hockey the most. And I think it's bred in them from the very beginning. So when if they get to the league, the level we're talking about, the NHL level, they have to be very talented, of course, but they also have to have that mentality, because somewhere along the line, if you don't, it's probably going to tear a team up. And I've seen through my son's progression through youth hockey, through juniors, through college, a lot of kids who, when he was in youth, were stars that went nowhere. And now I see kids that when he was in youth were kind of bit players that ended up playing in college hockey and ended up making it at least somewhere with their career. It wasn't all talent. It was based upon the fact that they were able to be coached, that they were team players, that they would do anything for the team. And so that's so much a part of hockey. So I think that hopefully that always stays that way. You're going to have players that are better, and some I would offer are more individual than others. There's no more a team player than Sidney Crosby. I'm saying this with this jersey behind me, but I mean, I get killed in Philly all the time for praising Sidney Crosby. But if Sidney Crosby was playing in Philadelphia, he'd be right there with Bob Clark,
right?
Maybe even above Bob. He's just a great talent, but unbelievable. You talk to any of his teammates, he's been a great ambassador for the game as well. So he's that. Connor McDavid to me is a little more individual. He's now learning that you have to have that team mentality. I think 2 years ago, it kind of clicked in for him. He's probably more talented than Sid, to be honest with you, because he has the legs that nobody has. But I don't think he had that will, that desire, the team desire that Sid had the moment he stepped on the ice. Now he's got it. I think he's going to win a cup soon. But, Crosby had that in his bag his second or third year. I mean, it's just some players have that more than others. We'll see about Connor Bedard. I'll be very interested to see, because he's been watched his entire life as the star. Seems extremely grounded to me. Seems like he's going to be more like Crosby than maybe McDavid or some of these other guys who it takes a long time. I mean, it's going to be an adjustment period, but he does seem really team oriented for a guy who's been catered to pretty much his whole life, just because he's so talented. So a lot of interesting things there. But the bottom line is these hockey players have that team concept. They're coachable. And I'm generalizing because there are some that aren't that way, but more so than I'd say any other sport.
Yeah, I love the fact that you bring like just that. I think one of the things that we get to see as hockey people is it's more of a family atmosphere. It really is. I depend on you. I'm up here in Nantucket right now, and the Yandles are doing they do our hockey school up here, right? And well, other than the fact that they're on Nantucket, it's just that they're in. You could see the way they talk to the kids and the way they interact. There's no like I'm better than you. There's no like, and not that they're equal, but they're like, listen, we're here to help you because we love the fact that you're committing to this, because we realize as hockey parents and as hockey players how difficult it is to find the time to play and train. And you mentioned all those other sports like basketball and basically baseball, and like you can do those sports anywhere. I mean, you could just get up and play. And now hockey, obviously with the ability to go outside and stick handle but you just the game itself, the team, the parental piece of it, or the support piece of it, having somebody that's going to bring you to the rink. It's not so much the early hours anymore, right? We've actually, a lot of us have gotten through that, right? The hours aren't the worst, but it is a huge commitment. It's the longest season. And the fact that these kids have to be multi-dimensional athletes, and they're in a room with other players they have to get along with. I mean, Lee and I have talked about this a lot, with a lot of guests about, you're in a locker room, you're in a tight space, you're in you're getting a little 12-inch piece of a bench, and you have to get along with everyone. And you got to find a way to, get there and play. And I think it's such a cool thing that you brought up, that, that you get to see it from your point of view when you're interviewing players and seeing them in the hallways and doing, and obviously you must, you're seeing them so much more out of the limelight of the game itself, and how they react to maintenance workers, Zamboni drivers, like the staff in the rink. When you're around these guys, as much as you are and as much as I am, you get to really see the type of human beings they are. For the most part, again, there are the guys, I get it, that aren't great, but for the most part, when you see these players, you can understand why it's easy to like them, and it's why it's easy to cheer for them to be successful.
It really is. And like I said, Reese Hoskins is that way. He's a baseball player. So there are players in other sports who are like this. That's why we're generalizing here. But the hockey mentality is, there's no question about it. And you bring up a good point about the family aspect of it. There's not many hockey players who make it without a lot of support from their family. In basketball, football, if you're really talented, somebody's going to spot you and they'll move you to camps. And whether your parents support you or not, you got to have your mom or dad driving you. And my wife would probably beg to differ with you on the hours things. At least for our son, it was still ridiculous hours, getting out to the rink. And my son was a rink rat, so he would actually go over, and don't tell anybody this, but he'd go over to the skate zone after everybody was done. They'd let him out on the ice because he just loved being on the ice. So just being by himself sometimes, and just loved it. So and there is that too. I fell in love with hockey watching the Mohawk Valley Comets of then the Eastern Hockey League in the 70s. And I was a really young kid. My father was a veterinarian. He had a split practice, and he and the other veterinarian got a half season ticket each, for a full. So we got to go to half the games one year. And I remember we were sitting there, and we went to like 5 games, and I said, Dad, we got to get the full season ticket next year, which we did, and lower down better seats. And I was in love with the game. I mean, instantaneously in love with it. I think when you go to the game, you can fall in love with it. On TV, you can understand it once you've fallen in love with it. But I think it's going to the games where you fall in love with it. And then once you're in love with it, and these players are in love with it for the most part, it's just there's just nothing like the sound of sticks and pucks. I mean, it's actually even better to me than the crack of the bat. So and it's just that mentality which is right there for all the players to have, and it's almost necessary. As I said, without that mentality, you're not going to be successful, or at least as successful as you would be with that team mentality. And I've seen it with kids at lower levels too. A lot of the kids who first start out in hockey don't necessarily have that mentality, and they don't last long, or they just don't have the love, and they give it up. So it kind of weeds itself out that way.
Jim, I'll tell you, just to prove your point, there is a need to teach kids this mentality, I think, at a younger age. And I do a lot of coaching. I've coached at every level, and I volunteered the last few years to coach mite hockey. And my condition was, you have to let me do team building with the 7 and 8 year olds. And I've talked about this many times on the show. I got pushback. They won't understand that. They can't do it. They were better than most adults that I've worked with. And the results were insane, in the sense of, not only did they understand kind of how to start to learn how to control their emotions as much as a 7 or 8 year old can, but towards the end of the season, and I always reiterate this on the show, I did not teach them this, what I'm about to say, but they were jumping in front of pucks in front of the net to help their goalie. They were helping each other. They were supporting each other on the bench. And I realized they can do this better than we can. And it can be taught. You talked about Sidney Crosby. Jim, I've never said this publicly. I went to his first game. I'm a huge Flyers fan. I went to his first game in New Jersey. All right. Because I knew when this kid was coming up, I had been following him at Shattuck and when he was on the Oceanic. And I'm like, this is a special person. And obviously, aside from hating him on the ice for many years, you can't not admire the man that he is and who he's become. And the stories that come out of nowhere about the things that he does for his teammates, for other people. He's a real model person. You said Bedard, man, his post conference right after he won the World Junior Championship. I mean, and for those of you who don't know, they went right up to him talking about him. Tell me about you. Tell me.
Yeah.
First answer was, I don't even want to talk about me. Because I want to talk about the Canada just won the World Junior Championship. Right. So I just reverting back to that, I totally understand where you're coming from. And these skills that you're talking about, the ability to be a great teammate, we say this on the show too all the time. Great players make other people around them better. Good players are talented, but great players make other people better. I think that's true in the broadcast booth. I think that's true in business. I think it's true of all of the different jobs and roles we spoke about before. Again, broadcasting alone, when you guys watch hockey, you see a person or two on TV. There's a whole lot of people behind the scenes making that happen.
Oh yeah.
And Jim, actually, every year at the last game, you always go over all the names and they always show all the credits. And I just want to reiterate what you said: the ability to understand how to be a great team player on both sides of that. To take direction, to give direction, to care about the person next to you, whether on a hockey bench, a broadcast booth, or a business. It is a skill that translates beyond just playing. And I think that as parents, it's one of the greatest gifts. We talk about the ROI of hockey all the time. It's one of the greatest gifts that your children will take away from the game. And you can cultivate that as a parent.
No doubt you can. And the game itself lends to that, because there is still the physicality of hockey, not obviously at youth levels, but they watch hockey, the kids, and you protecting your teammate is still such a huge part of the game, even though it's not necessarily done with fighting anymore, occasionally, and not anymore in the Quebec League. But it's done with other physical play, or it's done with just the, as Jonesy will tell you, all the stuff that goes on down around the benches. And that, I have your back mentality is huge to teach someone. And hockey gives that. In basketball, it's more about doing something to make yourself stand out. And to some degree in baseball. But again, baseball is one-on-one. And then football, depending on your position, the same thing. But in hockey, it's all for one. Mm-hmm. You're all over the ice. You have your positions, but at some point during the course of a season, a right wing is going to need a defenseman sticking up for him, or vice versa, or whatever. So I do see hockey as lending to that. It's a great life teaching sport for the youth. I do think we need, as probably all sports do, even more good coaches, because I think a lot of coaches at youth levels are worried too much about W's and L's. Need to be thinking
triple A's and double A's and
oh yeah, and they're thinking more about that than they are, getting these kids to where they need to be. I mean, but that's true. I suppose with all sports, we have so much in terms of youth sports now that there's only so many good coaches around, but constantly looking for better. My son had good coaches. He had bad coaches. He had some that he still talks to, that he looks up to, and others that he'll never talk to again. You wish there were fewer of the latter, right? But life's not perfect.
Yeah, I always say that I think you can, depending on how you approach it, you can learn as much from a bad coach as you can a good coach, depending on how you receive the information or receive.
Yeah, I think long term, but it's dangerous at young ages because they're so. You talked about, what you were teaching them at that age as mites. Right. That's when they're sponges. That's when I remember a lot of things that happened to me in Little League and bitty basketball, the youth sports, like it was yesterday, whereas I can't remember stuff that happened a week ago. You're so impressionable. It's right. Almost a cliche, but you're so impressionable at that age that you don't want. I don't want my child having to learn about what not to do quite that young.
That's got to be super fair.
Yeah, finding the good habits. But yeah, as you move along, and then certainly in retrospect, as you look back. Right. As my son does now at all the coaches, he can pick out the ones that were bad and say, yeah, that's not, if he goes into coaching, for instance, that's not something I'm going to do. But when at the time you worry about it having an impact where he pushes him away from the game even, or just taints his whole approach to what we were just talking about in the team influence. Thankfully that didn't happen with him, but I do know a lot of kids who got turned off by some coaches and never really came back or just lost their love for the game. And that's really a shame. So we have to watch that. We have to have good coaching. And coaches are really teachers that until you get to a certain age where it's completely coaching, but you're teaching about life up until a certain age. I don't know what age that would be, but it's some age you then become more of just a coach of the sport. But youth hockey, for sure, it's teaching, right? And it's not just teaching hockey, it's teaching life.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's so funny. That's why, honestly, that's why we got involved with this podcast and this platform to begin with. Up your fellow Syracuse in there, Christy, it was the same way. Like we just talked about, we having a voice to let people know, kind of what to look for and the pitfalls of falling into, what program you pick and where your kid could play or should play, or, the checklist that you need to make sure you have, so that when you're picking teams, you might be able to avoid some of these issues. And I think on the other side, we just have to remember too, that at the youth level, at any sport, these are mom and dads they're not educated teachers, right? They're not, for the most part, they're, and so I think and hockey's the leader by far, but all of these governing bodies have done such a great job of becoming more of teaching adults how to teach rather than the X's and O's of the game. And I think that's where I think we all fall short at the youth level, is working with children in a teaching capacity as opposed to knowing how much knowledge I have about the game. And I think we all wish we had that coach, right, that said, oh well, they know more about like how to teach my son and daughter than maybe they do about the game itself. But that's the most important piece. Is making sure our kids love coming to the rink every day. So, definitely that's a big piece that could be improved. But I think that's one of the reasons we love having guests like you on. It's because the more and more people that hear of others' experiences before them, hopefully there's an educational piece. And we joke around all the time that the people that really need to hear and listen to us and join us in this are never on this podcast. They'll never listen to the podcast. Yeah. They'll never come across it because they're like, well, I don't need to learn that. But and you mentioned it earlier in the show here that the vast majority though are positive and good and great really, and give their time and all their efforts. And if we can just, and I know in my line of work, if I can just put that little, those two or three that ruin it mentally for me, then everything else is great. I mean, I think it just, you can really embrace how fun it is, to be involved with the youth, levels of sport for sure. And great people like you and great parents.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's the other thing. I mean, we didn't even get into the parents. Some of the parents, all think their kid is going to be the next Gretzky and make it tough on the coach. The coach can do no right in their minds. So it does work both ways. It's not all on the coaches. The parents have to take a big part in the teaching as well, and also understand. And I went through this when a coach would discipline my son, not discipline like he suspend him or anything like that, but I think would slip him down a line or not give him the ice time. I'd always try to go over with my son as to why this is happening. Understand there's got to be a reason why this is happening. Unfortunately, there were a couple of coaches where it had nothing to do with my son's play. It had more to do with other things, and those are some of the bad coaches. But most times it was because he had, failed on a back check or whatever. And I said there's always reasons, and the best coaches have had open lines of communication for sure. And I said you can always ask a coach, why am I down on the fourth line now, or why am I in the third line? So if he won't talk to you, he's just a bad coach. And when he was young enough, if he wouldn't talk to him, I'd go talk to him. I stopped doing that pretty early. I never had a word with any of Johnny's coaches about his situation. The only time I did was when he suffered a concussion in a practice and the coach put him back on the ice. I had a problem with that, but I've never gone to a coach to say, hey, my son needs more ice time. One time I did go and say, is there any reason why he's not getting, because my son this was when he was young and he was afraid to ask him, and he told me, and I told my son, and we went on. I mean, that's just the way it was. But there are so many parents who are banging on the coach's door all the time, and that's just as harmful as the bad coaches. So that's the other issue with youth sports. I think there's way more great parents than there are bad parents, just like there are way more great coaches than there are bad, but there still are some, right? So we have to work around those, try to educate them, as you said, and do our best with that. But it was interesting to watch throughout my son's career, the way that works. And you even at the college level, if you're sitting around parents, you hear some things. It's like, whoa, no, they're after the coach for this or that, and I was like, no, that's not right. But I can't. I tell my wife I do not want to be around parents when I only get to see 4 or 5 of my son's games now because the schedules obviously don't. NHL and the college schedules, it's like they're playing Fridays, Saturdays almost all the time, and I'm almost always busy then, so I only get to see them 3 or 4 times. I don't want to be talking to parents while I'm at one of the few games I can see my son, so I'm antisocial. But part of it's because some of the stuff I hear, it's just I want to say no, that's not right. That's not why the coach just did that, but then I'm going to come off as this arrogant guy. I'm not going to do that either. So I just try to stay away, right? Just let me watch my son. So.
I think all three have experienced that. And, a couple of quotes for you, Jim. Mike and I say this all the time when we coach coaches is never be a kid's last coach ever.
Yeah. That's a great saying.
We take that mentality and especially, when some of the funnier ones, especially from kind of the peewee down, this is true all the way up. But from peewee down, when parents approach me of like, well, what are we working on? And they're not being super specific. It's like, I'm working on making sure they love the game.
Yeah.
Right. I'm making sure that they're smiling at the end of practice. And obviously the severity goes up as you rise in the age and rise the ranks. But if your kid's 9, my job is to make sure they want to play when they're 10 and that they can skate to some level. Right. Those are things I think about. You alluded to something a minute ago that segues perfectly into one of my questions. Over 30 years, you've seen the game change a lot. And I'm not just talking rules. Athletes have obviously improved in their athleticism. But you were talking about coaching, and I think we've seen coaching change a lot, especially over the last 5 or 6 years. I won't name specific NHL coaches, but you said it, the need to communicate, the need to have some empathy and understand. So you can keep it with coaching, you can keep it with anything, but what are some of those kind of more mental changes that you've seen over the years that have transformed the league?
I mean, you can go back to before I was in the league. It was more just whatever he says goes. The coach was the boss, and he didn't need to tell you why he was doing things. It was just, that's the way it was. That's the way it is. And so that was the way it was probably into the 80s, 90s. Scotty Bowman, the all-time winningest coach, wasn't necessarily like that. He was more like the mad professor kind of coach that said, I'm going to do these things. You're not going to know why, but you're going to do them. So there was still that kind of mentality. Do it even though you don't know why. Well, today's athlete now wants to know why. They always want to know why. They've been around through social media and other aspects of our society now. They are around the sport, involved in the sport at an earlier age and in a way larger fashion than we were, or anybody even before us or slightly after us, to be honest with you. And I should say well after me, a little bit after you. And, it's, I mean, so they have more knowledge of this. They've already read books, read stories about coaching and things. So they're smart. They really are. And so coaches now have to be much more open to communicating with their players and kind of rationalizing with them as opposed to just telling them what to do. And I think now, and it's been this way for a while, but it's getting even more so and probably will continue to, but it's now more the best coaches are the best people managers, not necessarily the best X and O coaches. I mean, X's and O's can take you so far. They can certainly help you, and depending on the sport, like football, X's and O's are still huge. Hockey, I mean, hockey's hockey. I mean, we hear about the system this team plays and that team, but the differences in systems are so small now that it's more about what you're going to get out of your players and keeping them happy, motivated. And again, can't generalize. You're going to be coaching, an NHL coach is going to have, over the course of a season, 30 to 35 players on his roster. Unfortunately for the Flyers, it's been closer to 40 these last couple of years because of all the injuries. But how many ever players you're going to have, you are going to have to treat them all differently, right? There's no blanket. Back in the day, Paul Brown in the NFL and those guys, Tom Landry, those old-time NFL coaches, this is the way it is. All you guys are going to do, Vince Lombardi, all you guys are going to adhere to this. You can't do that anymore because player A is a completely different makeup than player B. Some players might need to be kicked in the butt. Other players might need to be patted on the back. You guys know this. You've coached. So you have to be very good at analyzing people, understanding what they need. Psychology is really a big part of coaching now. So to me, that's the best coaches are that. And you look around at some of the coaches who've been winning lately, and that's what happens. And then the old school coaches, John Tortorella is an old school coach, have had to adjust, and the good ones can adjust and have been able to. And John Torts will tell you, he coaches way different now than he used to. He's still old school, don't get me wrong, but he communicates a lot behind the scenes. If the player comes to him, he's always going to talk to him. Some, and John, I think, is one of them, still coach through the media. Others don't at all. It's really what happens behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. But the bottom line is you got to understand the players for what they are and coach them all specific to their needs and desires. Whereas before it was all, they're all my players. Here's the way it's going to be. Those days are gone.
We talk a lot, again, Mike and I, about how important it is to establish a level of trust, number one.
Yeah.
And
Trust
then
is huge.
Understanding how to motivate someone, and everyone's motivated differently. And you said you can't blanket motivation. You can't assume how you are motivated it's going to motivate everyone. And then there's also the understanding. Torts always seemed to me today as the type of guy, he's going to tell you exactly what he wants. And I tell players all the time, there is an element of that that's good. It's good to have a coach say, this is exactly what I want, right? While also understanding who you are as a person and having to get the best out of you. Some coaches, especially the younger levels, they play mind games. And I for the life of me, still don't understand that. I don't think that's a healthy way to approach any player. Mike, you were going to say something. Sorry.
No, I'm just saying that you watch the evolution of guys like Mike Babcock and, now, coming back into the league too. And, can he evolve? Can he find a way to reach players. And you know, I think a lot of us as coaches, I mean, it's harder to coach because I used to love when I get to say, listen, this is the way it is, and this is how we're doing it. And you know, it's more of a cookie cutter way of coaching. And now it's a lot. You really do have to dig in, you know, research your players more, connect with your players more, you know, lean on these support systems more. You know, your assistant coaches and other staff members now that are part of these teams. And we're seeing, right, that the college level and the NHL level, you know, more and more depth in coaching, right? There's more coaches coaching more players in you know, which might be a good thing. I mean, you know, if you're getting more positional coaching, then all of a sudden you're in this, maybe you're just, you know, now you just have to go, it's like football, right? You only have to go after a certain segment of the team and connect with that group to be successful. And but it's good though, right? It's an evolution, and I think it's crazy to me that evolution though in coaching, actually it's harder to coach, to get down to the youth level. You know, because there's still a lot of Scotty Bowmans out there. There's still a lot of, you know, there's still a lot of guys that say this is the way it's going to be, and that's it. And you know, you could see how difficult it is for parents and players to put themselves in those, you know, those situations. But no, it's great. I think that's a good thing it's a good thing to remind everybody that's listening, and certainly players, that we all want to evolve as coaches, and they could be a big part of that as well too, right? You know, parents coaching their players to speak like you did. Like there's a certain age when you want your son or daughter to step in and have that conversation with a coach, and there's a certain age when you need to be there with that player and advocate for them as well, because they're children. They're not expected to be able to, you know, make these decisions on their own.
Yeah, as long as I'm advocating and not trying to tell the coach to play my son more. I mean, that just doesn't help the coach. Doesn't help. I don't think most kids want their parents doing that either.
Yeah.
So you know, but there's a lot of them that still do that, and it's done out of love. I understand that, but you just have to, as a parent, sit back, look at the situation, put yourself in your kid's shoes, skates. Do you really would you have wanted your parent to go knock on a coach's door and say, play my son more? I don't think so. Not many people would want that. So, I mean, I remember there was one parent of a teammate of my son's, and this was, I can't remember exactly what level, but he's probably in the 9 or 10-year-old range. Where he literally went down and he started banging on the glass of the bench. Get my son out. It was just, I mean, and the guy's a good guy. You know, he was a really good person to be around until the game started and his son was playing, and then he was just out there. So, you know, it's not done to be a bad person. It's done out of love, but you just have to control yourself in that. And as far as the coaching, you bring up that point. I don't want to say that as a coach you can't have team rules that everyone has to adhere to. You have to have that basic rules, you know, beyond time, things like that. Those still exist. We're talking more about your interaction with the player over the course of a season, you know, on how he's playing, systems, things like that, and then just how he's doing, how he is mentally. And at the NHL level, I don't know if this you guys know probably better than I, if it's down to the collegiate level, but do they have mental health coaches now with the collegiate teams? They do, obviously, in the NHL now. I mean, so you have people you can go to now. So
it's slowly being filtered in. The issue I have, Jim, is there's still a stigma surrounding mental health and mental fitness. Now it's definitely breaking down very quickly nowadays, but still just the ability to have an athlete say, hey, you can express yourself, maybe not on the ice or on the bench, but let's talk about how you're feeling. I guarantee you that's making some listeners uncomfortable, me just saying that out loud. So it's an evolving process. I believe personally that if you want to get the maximum performance out of a player at any level, you really have to know that person and make sure that they feel safe in that environment. And when I say safe, I don't mean like they're not going to get cut or that they're not going to have things happen to them to deal with adversity, but safe in the environment of you can talk about it, but you have to be accountable to everything. That's where I see it evolving. Jim, you brought up something funny. I promise you we won't keep you too much longer. I promised our producer, Caitlin, I wouldn't keep you hostage all day, even though I've been looking forward to this one. But you mentioned this, and when I was creating the questions for this, I always try and ask questions you don't get all the time, right? And I realized there's one here that's super applicable to all the coaches and the parents listening. So when we see a bad call or a controversial call, at minimum, we can kind of mutter under our breath about it. That's the minimum we can do. I've been watching you your whole career. Very, very few times have I seen you be critical. So my answer on the air, I should say, how do you work through those moments? Because I know you're seeing it. You see what I see. You see what we see. The refs aren't perfect. How do you keep that under control? I mean, does it bubble up for you, or is it just, I'm calling the game right now, I'm a pro, this is how it's done?
Okay, so you're talking about when I'm on the air, now when I'm watching my son, right?
I'm definitely talking about when you're on the air. Yeah.
Two different things.
Because you're by yourself when you're watching your kid. You can say whatever you want.
Well, again, it comes back to what I was talking about with that other parent. I've said some things about refs watching my son play that I'm not proud of. I didn't scream it out necessarily, but I at least said it because it hurts when you see a bad call. It hurts your blood. It's just different. And hey, I've been on this emblem now for 3 decades, as you said, so I kind of bleed orange and black too. But it's not I say nothing called. When I say nothing called, that pretty much tells you I thought something should have been called. So that's basically it. Yeah. And there are people out there who think I'm very critical of officials. So, again, it's all the eye of the beholder, because there are other announcers who are probably less so than me. There are certainly some that are much more so than me, but there are times when I think it was Chris Terrian in his book said it's the one thing he thought I was too critical of calls that against the Flyers or whatever. So it's all what people see. But usually I just say nothing called, or I've gotten better at it. If you find some tapes of me early in my career, I probably had a couple meltdowns. And when fighting was allowed and the brawls and things were happening, and you're more emotionally involved there too, or if one of your Flyers, is 2 guys beating them up or something, you start saying things that, you can't say that on the air. And now we're getting to an age where where you got to be really careful with what you say on the air. So anything ends up as a Twitter, you send it out on Twitter, it can end your job. We've seen it with some baseball guys, and I mean, you just have to be very, very careful. So now, even when it comes to calls, you don't want to be personal about a call on a referee or anything like that. So, but we're all fans deep down. So, you do have to suppress that. There's no doubt about it. I was helped by having Jonesy as a partner for the last 17 years, because Jonesy was a national announcer and he couldn't go there. Right. So I always knew I had that, and he would he would balance it if I did go pro orange and black sometimes, which I definitely did. There were times where he was so down the middle on a call that I felt I needed to take it the other way because we're broadcasting to Flyers fans. So I thought we were good balance that way. And I think I'm going to have the same situation, positive situation with a guy who I'm going to work with moving forward, which I can't say right now. But
I believe that. Yeah, we'll find out soon.
But if you listen to what I'm saying right now, it's going to be a very similar situation. So I've been blessed throughout my career to have a lot of guys who Gary Dornhofer, my very first television broadcast partner, was CBC national announcer. So he had that same approach too, although he would hammer from time to time more than Jonesy. But again, I'm broadcasting to 90% Flyers fans, maybe 95, maybe 85, whatever. It's heavily
depends on the team's doing
that are watching our broadcast. Yeah. But I mean, so I'm broadcasting from a Flyers fan standpoint. When I do games for TNT, it's right down the middle. I mean, I try to be as smack down the middle as I can be. And there's even less a chance of me criticizing an official on a national broadcast. And to try to finally get around to answering your question, it's I just try to suppress it as much as I can. There are some times when the frustration just builds up and you say something, and it's not good. Now, watching my son, like I said, totally different story. Like when there's a bad call against your son, it's very hard to control yourself, at least from at least saying something. I'm not one of these people who's going to just scream at a referee the whole game. That does sort of nobody well. I've thought about, thankfully never did, going down after a game once or twice to say, do you realize the call you made? It wasn't always on my son. It was something in the game that I saw that was just so bad. And I felt like I needed to go down and tell this guy, if he really wanted to continue to be a referee, you just can't make it. Right. But I never did that either, which is probably a good thing.
No, you've always been professional. I've loved listening to you,
Well, I appreciate it.
No, and I appreciate you. And you've mentioned Keith Jones a few times. I got to ask one question. So I'm not going to ask you, how do you think he's going to do or anything like that. I'm actually more interested in the qualities about him you've seen as a player, because you called him as a player, and almost as a commentator too. And I remember last person in the broadcast booth that I remember moving up to a level like that is John Davidson.
Yeah.
So there's a precedent here, but John Davidson, another character type person. Tell me about Keith Jones, the person, and how he can transcend so many levels of the game.
Yeah. Well, first of all, when you think about Keith, I think about Keith Jones, we go on the road, GMs would seek him out. Like, Edmonton, Kenny Hollins, comes into the cafeteria, media room, whatever, and comes over to talk to Jonesy. Jim Rutherford, now in Vancouver, when he was in Pittsburgh, Joe Sakic. I can go right down the list. We're sitting there and they come over to him. It's not like he has to go seek these people out, because Jonesy's, first of all, he's through his playing career and now his broadcast career, he's had a gazillion contacts, right? But he's also somebody that once you're around him for a little while, you feel like he's your teammate. So whether it was in broadcasting or certainly as a player. So he's connected all over the place. I don't know of anybody right now that is more connected than him. So for people who said, wow, he's going to be a broadcaster president, what kind of preparation is that? The only way he could have been better prepared for it was if maybe he'd been a GM. All right. But he's connected to all the GMs. He's connected to the team presidents. He's connected to coaches, even players to some degree, some now. And so he's got it. He's got that. He's got what I talked about before, an innate ability to judge talent, which will really come out now. He's got old school in him for sure, but he's also willing to always take in new concepts. Got to be open-minded there. And Danny Briere, the same thing. So I think there'll be a great duo that way. He's dumb like a fox. If you were listening to him on the radio, on the show, in the morning show, you would not think of him as a future president of a sports team. But he's a chameleon. He knows how to adjust to his market. And when he was on the morning show, he wasn't supposed to sound like a future team president. He was supposed to sound like a funny person, which he was. He's got an unbelievable wit, a very quick wit. I wish I had a wit as quick as his. And so, I mean, that was what he was doing in that role. His role as my partner on the air was to be the Flyers announcer. His role when he was at NBC or TNT was as a national. He was the different person for all those. Well, now he's got a different role. He's a team president, and he's adjusted to that as well. He'll do fine. He'll do great. I mean, some of it's luck. They got to have health. I'm telling you right now, if Sean Couturier and Cam Atkinson come back this year, the Flyers could easily be in contention for a playoff spot. Everyone's talking about how bad they're going to be. But there's a lot of going on with the Carter Hart and all that. We got to wait on that. But if he's back with the team and Atkinson and Couturier actually are 75-80% even of what they were, with the young players they already had taking another step, some of them, some won't, some will, and then a couple added to it, like Forster, maybe Andre, we'll see about that. But the top half make the playoffs. They can contend. I'm not saying they'll make the playoffs. I'm not saying they're going to win the Stanley Cup, but they can contend this year to make the playoffs. So, and then you've already got Cutter Gauthier coming. You've got Mitchkov. You've got some studs down the pipe. So they've already transformed this into a pretty optimistic situation. And I only see them doing that more and more as we move along. So the qualities he has are he's able to adjust to situations. Very smart. Don't tell him I said that.
We're gonna send this right to him now.
No. But he is. I mean, he's dumb like a fox. He comes off as this, on that radio at least, he'd come off as this guy just sits back, lazy, doesn't do anything, and just shoots off one-liners. Well, he does shoot off the one-liners, but he's not lazy and he's very smart. And I like his chances. And Danny, same thing. Danny, I've known for so long, and he did everything he could possibly do to prepare for this job. People say, oh, what background does he have? What background doesn't he have? he was a star level player
Mm-hmm.
who went down to the low levels of the minors to look at how those organizations were built, and then went right up through and had his hands on just about every aspect of the Flyers organization over the last couple of years. So I don't know how he could have prepared himself any better, to be honest with you, other than being a GM before he was a GM, which, you can get a GM from another team. They went that route. It didn't go very well. So, I mean, I think that these two guys are ready.
Jim, I'll tell you, as much as I want to dive on the fish hook to talk about the Flyers with you, I think some of the listening audience would kill me, but I will
Yeah, I have
reiterate
like
what you just said.
7,000 other podcasters that I'll do plenty of that. Yeah.
Right.
It's been
Yeah.
refreshing talking about the other aspects, to be honest.
Right. I'd love to do it, but again, we have a lot of Ranger fans that listen and they don't want to hear about that. But joking aside, one of the things you said about Jonesy is he understands his role. And I think that is a key takeaway here because, Mike and I have coached players. Well, I'm a scorer. That's my role. And the truth is, look, you might be great at scoring. And as you get older and develop, you might fall into a role like that for sure. But your ability to fall into multiple roles and be good at multiple roles, and as you say, become a chameleon, man, that is a skill set. And it's a valuable
And let me
one.
say this about Jonesy too. As a player, he was almost out of the game at about 19. So he's low level junior hockey, and then he got to Western Michigan and he took off.
Right.
But he doesn't have that. You got to be a superstar from the time you're 10 to be good in this game. He understands late bloomers. He understands also that a team can't be made up of 18 Connor McDavids. You have to have your support players who are willing to accept their roles.
Mm-hmm.
And I think team building will be a major strength of his, and Danny too. So that is really what it's all about, right? When you're in those positions.
Right. Well, and I'll also say his book is fantastic, Jonesy. If you ever read it, I one quick one. I remember my favorite game. I think it's one of your favorite games is the marathon against Pittsburgh in 2000, and he talks about being so tired. I think in the fourth or fifth overtime that he got on the ice, looked left, looked right, and got back into the bench. And it's a great read.
This right here is the box score from that game.
Oh, you're kidding me.
Keith Jones. Where are you, Jonesy? Come on. 37 minutes and 50 seconds.
Wow.
Nothing. Let me see here. He had
that'd be a plus minus. Yeah.
He had no shots, 2 missed shots. That's the 2. You go all the way across. His stat line is the only one filled. Everybody else, there's numbers all over the place.
It's lit up.
He literally had nothing but that. And he had he tells me, don't forget the +1, because he was on the ice just going off as Keith Primo scored the game winner. But yeah, he tells that story all the time. He tells some great stories about what happened in between periods too. And that's a night none of us who were there will ever forget. But yeah, he that book was interesting. I'll tell you also that he hasn't read it yet. So, John Butchiegrass helped him with that book, but yeah, that's just Jonesy. That's his sense of humor. Don't let him fool you. He wrote the book, or he did have help, but in that situation, he was basically at the very end of his career. He was on one leg. The year before that in the playoffs, he was our best player against the Toronto Maple Leafs. We lost in the first round, couldn't score any goals. He scored, I think, 3 of our goals. We barely scored in that series, and but he was our best player. I remember going up to him and saying after the game, during locker cleanout day, "You are our best player." Little that I know is that we worked with this guy for 17 years, but
that's a good impression you left on.
yeah. But I mean, so again, you can underscore that too. But he played on lines with Peter Forsberg. He played a lot with Eric Lindros. You don't get to that point and be on those lines with players of that caliber unless you're a pretty good player yourself. But he was almost out of the sport, so he has that angle too, where he can basically see players that maybe in a development camp or in a training camp who aren't necessarily your studs. Because if you look at the winning teams now, you can't have all first round picks. You got to have some 5th rounders hit or some undrafted players hit or whatever. They're all Braden Point. You got to have some guys who are not first round picks that hit as really big players. And I think
Right.
he's going to be really good at finding those kind of players.
That bottom six is insanely important, and understanding players that can fill those roles. And Jim, I'll tell you, I didn't know that was the stat sheet behind you. You'll laugh at this, but I missed the first half of school the next day after that game, and I was so happy my mother and father let me stay up to watch that. And I remember them coming downstairs. And for those of you listening, this was well past midnight. And I remember
2:30. The game ended at 2:27, I believe. Something like that.
I remember them coming out. You have to go to bed. I said, I am not going to bed during this game. This is the longest game ever. And I still remember your call at the end. It was fantastic.
It's still the longest game in modern history. There were 2 games longer before forward passing was allowed. I said, you can't count those. Come on. Forward passing was
different game. Yeah.
So the modern history, I mean, the game last year came really close. The game in the bubble came very even closer. But we're still, and so because of that, whenever anyone asks me my favorite moment, it's still that. But the 2010 season had a bunch of moments too, and there's been a whole lot. You do something for 30 years, you got a lot of great moments. But that night, never forget it. Or morning, night and morning.
I'm with you, and I'm not gonna lie to you. I silently root against those games going past this one because it was a pretty defining moment of.
Don't tell anybody, I do too. I was really worried there in the finals last year.
It was really close. It was close. You end up
Yeah.
cheering really loud with his score. It's before
Yeah.
that. Jim,
Actually, that was the conference finals, right? Was it conference finals?
I believe so. There was a lot of overtime this past postseason. I mean, it was a pretty spectacular postseason, despite the ratings. It was well done. Jim, last one for me. As a broadcaster, you've been invited into the homes of hockey fans for years. As we said at the top, you're entering. This is your 30th season, correct? If I'm not mistaken, or 30th year.
It's 31st.
Yeah.
It's weird because we had a year we lost. So
Right.
it's my 31st year, 30th season.
There you go. Okay, so I'm not completely wrong with that.
No, you're not.
Look, this is true. Again, Gene Hart was before you, but you are now the voice of an entire generation of Flyers fans. I mean, I grew up with you, and new fans are hearing you now. Is that something that you're able to reflect on in your life, or are you still kind of more just I'm focused on the work that I'm doing?
I can't really put my arms around it because Gene, first of all, I did not replace Gene. I followed Gene.
Mm-hmm.
No one's replacing Gene. He's still and always will be, in my mind, at least, the voice of the Flyers. When it kind of hits home a little bit, though, is when I'm talking to somebody your age or maybe a little younger than you, that they don't remember Gene.
Mm-hmm.
And so 35, let's say. So people starting to get into middle age. Sorry to tell you that.
I've accepted it. Don't worry.
I don't remember Gene, and to me, I can't wrap my arms around because it seems like yesterday I got here, and so that's tough. I do get a sense of it though when I'm around, and the fans are so nice to me, and I mean, I have haters out there too, but for the most part, they're really nice to me, and it's I'm on camera for like 45 seconds. So I don't know how they even know who I am. And some don't until I open up my mouth. But the fact that many people know who I am, even though I'm not really on camera that much, it shows you that I've been around a long time and that these people really love the Flyers. And so, yeah, it's hard. I mean, I guess there's only like 3 or 4 guys who've been with the same team now longer than I have. Sam Rosen, obviously, is the dean. And then there's a bunch of us right in the same area. And with one team, it's like Randy Hahn, myself, and maybe Joe Beninati. There's a couple others. But so, yeah, to me, it seems I still feel like I'm a young announcer and I'm not. So, and what really has made it hit home is this past year, Steve Coates retired. My producer, Brian Cooper, retired. Last year, Zach Hill, the longtime public relations guy for the Flyers, retired. And these are my guys. Zach and I started the same day with the Flyers. Coatesy was my guy, my first broadcast partner. Brian Cooper had been my only television producer my entire career here in Philadelphia. And they've all retired. So do the math, Jim. It's coming. But I just don't think of that. I don't feel that way. And as long as I can continue to do, as good a job as I feel I'm doing, if I feel it's slipping, I'm gone. I'm out of there. I do not want to be one of those announcers who's overstays his welcome just to make it a certain amount of years or whatever. But to answer your question, it really is hard to put my arms around. The only time it does is when I talking to somebody your age or maybe a tad younger than you, but you know who Gene Hart is, and they don't. And it's sad to me, first of all, because he is the voice of the Flyers, and 30 years from now, nobody's going to know who I am, I guess. But you think about what he did. I mean, he taught this whole area, the sport of hockey.
He did. He really did.
And he also got to call 2 cup championships, which I'll never do because we don't get to call the finals. But so he was the eloquent messenger of glorious times, I like to say. But he more importantly taught this area about the game. He should never be forgotten, right? So if you're of your age, I would hope, or younger, your parents would let you know who Gene Hart was, and make sure if you're a Flyers fan, you know.
Yeah, I can tell you this, that the Gene Hart calls, I'm well aware of, obviously, Gene, the calls I know are the Stanley Cup calls. The Flyers win the Stanley Cup, right? So that will always echo in my mind. But I will tell you, as the ambassador of the middle-aged, I've always loved listening to you. I mean that, Jim, and I appreciate that the answer is humble, but you really have voiced the Flyers for me as well. And that does not, like you said, I'm not replacing Gene with that. I mean, he has his time, but for me, it's been you. And it's been a wonderful journey. I mean that.
It means a lot. And hey, I'm blessed. I every time my feet hit the ground in the morning, I have a game to call at night. It's a good day. So I talk to these students all the time, and I tell them when I was like 11, I wanted to be doing a major sport. I wasn't picky. I loved hockey. I loved football. I love basketball. I love baseball. So it wouldn't matter. But hockey kind of came to me. It's a long story we didn't even get into. But the Devils moved their farm team to Utica when I was working at a radio station. I ended up doing the games, and it was it. Bingo. The light went on. I loved hockey way before that. But as a broadcaster, that's when it became reality that was going to be my path, right? Because I was doing the AHL at like 24. And then by 30, I was in the NHL. So I'm blessed. I'm basically living a dream. So, but I really appreciate when someone like you, who's been a fan for that many years, says that. And I do not at all take that for granted. And I'm hoping, I mean, I've had so many, we talked about this earlier, there's so many great moments I've been able to call, and I've been blessed to call and lucky enough to call. And I want to get back to that before I hang up the mic or whatever it is you hang up when you're a broadcaster, because, I want the Flyers to be back to where they were as contenders every year. And I think we're headed in that direction. So I want to at least be there to see that through, and hopefully because I was not around, not that old. I was not around when they won their cups. And I'd love to see that Stanley Cup going down Broad Street. I was part of the Phillies parade in 2008, and it's, I can't even explain it to you. A real quick story. We've been on forever here, but
you've got as much time as you want.
Howie Rose, another guy who had done both hockey and baseball, called me after the Phillies won the World Series in 2008. And he said, "Get ready for an experience you're never going to forget, the parade." And I said, I'm not really, I'm serious. I'm not much of a parade person. I said, it'll be fun, but whatever. But he was so right. I mean, on that float or whatever it was we were on, it was a truck, I guess. And I was also on with Harry Callis, and the love sent Harry's way was just amazing. But to hear the roar and to see the happiness and the love, and in this town in particular, hey, sorry, Rangers fans, I know the parades are great in New York too, but Philadelphia, the passion they have for sports here is right there with the New Yorks and Bostons, if not a tad higher on the crazy side.
I would agree.
And it's in that instance, it's all love, right? There's no haters in that crowd. It's all love. And it was amazing. I'll never, ever, ever forget that. So I would love to experience that with the Flyers for sure. Whether I'd be in the parade, I don't know, but to see the Flyers get their parade, and but even short of that, to be back in contention in the playoffs, relevant, at least contenders for the cup down the road. That's what I want to see before I give it up. But God willing, I will. We'll see. But I really appreciate your comments. Very nice of you, and I do not take them for granted.
No, thanks, buddy. And I'll tell you this too. I want to see that for you as well, obviously. And I think that one of the interesting things, and I'm not making this so much about the Flyers, but the aspect of them is that they lost their identity there for a while. I think they're getting it back now. And you have been a constant through that. And there have not been many constants through that process. Even the jerseys didn't stay constant. So I think that's a pretty strong point you made earlier about you've been doing this with one team for a long time. And you also get us through those times in a weird way. But
the last 3 years have been really difficult because
been tough.
It wasn't just the hockey. I mean, we had the pandemic and doing games off a monitor for a while, then in an empty building for a while with fake sound. And they're going to be actually the weirdest thing though is baseball, doing games with all the placards in the seats. That was the weirdest.
That's almost like nightmare scenario. Like
that was weird. But the fake sound in the Wells Fargo was pretty weird too. We're back to fans and all that, which is thankful, and the team's getting better. So and it's fun to watch a team grow, and we're going to get to see that process here over the next couple of years, and hopefully grow into something special. And that's what we're in it for.
Well, and you're going to be part of that. And Mike, any questions before I close it out?
No, it's been great, and looking forward to the new season starting up.
Yeah, me too. So, is JimJacksonBroadcasting.com if you're interested in learning more about his coaching. We'll get a grade on the podcast after we get off the air here from Jim. But again, JimJacksonBroadcasting.com.
All good.
Yep.
You buttered the teacher up enough. It's all good.
Yeah. Well, hey, listen, I meant every word. And that is going to do it for this edition of Our Kids Play Hockey. Remember, you can hear every single podcast, every episode of this, The Ride to the Rink, and Our Kids Play Goalie at OurKidsPlayHockey.com or wherever podcasts can be heard. But without that, everybody have a wonderful day. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time. We hope you enjoyed this edition of Our Kids Play Hockey. Make sure to like and subscribe right now if you found value wherever you're listening, whether it's a podcast network, a social media network, or our website, OurKidsPlayHockey.com. Also, make sure to check out our children's book, When Hockey Stops, at WhenHockeyStops.com. It's a book that helps children deal with adversity in the game and in life. We're very proud of it. But thanks so much for listening to this edition of Our Kids Play Hockey, and we'll see you on the next episode.